Okay, we're live. Good morning, Dr. Payan.
Good morning. Good morning to all of you who are probably listening to us.
Hopefully. I'm trying to see if, okay, so looks like I can post a comment on Facebook. So I'll just say we're live. All right. And we'll go from there. And also what I'll do is I'll post the recording of this so people can watch it later. But hopefully over time we'll develop an audience and people will be joining us when we do these live streams. So the topic for today is, who are the Taliban? The Taliban have been in the news a lot lately. So I think people probably are, they want to know exactly who they are. They also might be mixing them up with some other groups. They might, there might be all kinds of clarifications we can make about who they are, and maybe go in a little bit into their origins and why they're in Afghanistan. So I heard this morning there was another car bomb in Afghanistan, and I'm just wondering, would that have been a Taliban? I guess maybe we don't know who would have done such a thing, but I'm sure everyone's wondering the same kind of things. So,
yeah, it's almost a daily occurrence in Afghanistan. Unfortunately, there are these kind of suicidal bombings, car bombs, assassinations, and targeted scholars, government officials, foreigners, diplomats. These were all targeted in the past, since I would say September the 11th, 2001. And after that, when the United States and the coalition forces went to Afghanistan, this movement has gathering the momentum. And it's really probably now we are reaching the point that their activities are increasing daily. Yeah, you're right. I heard that too. I was watching and following very closely.
So, where do the Taliban come from? Are they mainly from Afghanistan?
Let me go to the origins of that. The word Taliban comes literally from the Arabic word talib. Talib in Arabic means student or the seeker of knowledge. Then this word was borrowed in Persian, talib, a singular, one student of a religious institution. Then in Persian, the an, the literal transliteration of an, when you as a suffix, you add an to a word or a name. Let's take asp. In Persian means horse. Mm-hmm. When you add the an, it becomes aspan, means plural horses.
Right.
So Talib is a one student. So Taliban, this Persian suffix made it plural. So Taliban means a group of, more than one Talib. So the Taliban is a Persianized version. The root is in Arabic, but that's what, these were originally students of religious institutions.
Okay.
And the religious institutions from the beginning of the Islam, when Islam spread to other countries, and now we have about 57 Muslim majority countries. In each one of these Muslim countries who adopted Islam as their religion, they adopted the Islamic religious institutions too. So the elementary school in the Islamic tradition begins in a mosque. So mosques could be considered as when the girls and boys up to age of 8 or 9, they go to the mosques. And then gradually when Islam spread and Islam took roots in many other countries, spread to parts of Central Asia and Turkey and even Egypt, and went to Spain, at the spread of Islam. So this Muslim educational systems were adopted in those countries where they had accepted Islam. So if we go to the equivalent of the elementary schools in the West is a mosque. Then gradually when Islam spread and developed, the secondary schools were originated in the Muslim societies, and those were called madrasas. Madrassah, that's the translation. Right. So these madrasas are the institutions of higher education based on Islamic teachings. Then gradually, when we come to the 10th century, in the 10th century, the institutions of higher education like Al-Azhar, Darul Funun, so these were the like universities. So the elementary schools are in the mosques, then the secondary schools are the madrasas, then you have this institution, the universities, Islamic other traditions. Then in the 11th and 12th centuries, when Islam spread to other countries, into Turkey and other places, they adopted some of the Western models of educational systems, elementary schools, secondary schools, and higher education institutions. So now in any Muslim society, we have two parallel systems of education. One are the religious institutions like the mosques and the madrasas, and the Darul Funun or Darul Ulum al-Sharia, whatever they call it. So these are the Islamic institutions of elementary, secondary, and higher education. And then they also have the same similar as in European models they have adopted, like elementary schools, secondary schools, colleges and universities. So both of these institutions are functioning. But the Taliban, the word Taliban is now used for those group of students that who are in religious institutions, the equivalent of seminaries in Jewish tradition or the Christians. They have seminaries where they train clergy. So these madrasas and some of the institutions of higher education are training clergy, Muslim clergy, and Muslim legal scholars and others. So these two parallel systems are very common in Muslim society, but they still use the word Taliban for those that who go to the institutions based on Islamic teachings. And what are the Islamic teachings? It's mostly the Quranic teachings and the traditions of the Prophet Muhammad. And also they teach sciences and philosophy and logic and astronomy and other subjects too at the same time, even in the religious institutions.
Yeah. I mean, Al-Azhar is a completely, like a comprehensive university now that is also a madrasa, I guess.
Yeah, in the history of Muslim societies, you will see these two parallel systems. But the people that who go to the seminaries, the equivalent of the seminaries, which are the madrasas, and again, in the case of Afghanistan, if we go now specifically focus on Afghanistan, Taliban were not a movement as a group.
Okay.
To go to the field and participate in political activism. This is a new development, relatively speaking. Yes, it started with two developments in the 1970s. We're talking about the 20th century development of Taliban movement as a political movement, as an activist movement. The two contributing factors were, one was the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979, and another development which happened in Iran was the Iranian Revolution. The Iranian Revolution somehow defeated the monarchy at the time, monarchy of Shah of Iran, and they captured the government under the leadership of the Ayatollahs and the religious. These Ayatollahs were also the product of these religious institutions in Iran, in Iraq. So these were the Shia branch of because again, here comes the Sunni and the Shia. Both the Sunnis and the Shiites have this tradition.
In Iran and Iraq, do they have Shi'i versions of madrasas, or are they also called?
Yes. Okay. Yeah. In Iraq, in Iran, in any Muslim society that you go to, there are series of madrasas and there are series of this new modern Western model-based educational system. So they both function. But day by day, when we see that it is the rise of this other modern education has almost dominated in most Muslim countries.
Okay.
Even in Iran, and even in Afghanistan, still the universities are attracting more students, and that's more common than the madrasas. Yeah. So the madrasas became important when the 10 years of the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan from 1979 to 1989. The Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. About 5 million Afghans became refugees in Pakistan, 5 million. And about 4 million of them became refugees in Iran. Most of these refugees could not afford to go to the modern schools. Their children were channeled into these madrasas. Because madrasas are cheap, they are giving them food and shelter and this Islamic, which based on charities.
I see.
And for the Afghan Mujahideen, when they went to Pakistan, 5 million of them, so their children could not go to the modern education schools because they're expensive. So all those kids were channeled to these madrasas, and these madrasas were funded by Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates. These Arab countries were contributing. And to be honest, Americans also supported this Islamic groups at the beginning against the Soviet Union. So Americans were indirectly contributing to that, the development of this sort of extremist groups which originated in the madrasas of Pakistan and Afghanistan. So that's what, when Afghans are talking about, the experts are talking about that the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, the 10 years occupation, contributed to this development of the Taliban movement, which later they comes and they are now a power to reckon with. In the revolution, in the case of Iran, it was the Shia branch of Islam also that we see that now Hezbollah is one of those. And all the Pasdaran revolutionary guards and others. These are all the consequences of the Iranian revolution and then the Shia branch of Islam. And in the Sunni branch of Islam, these Taliban have become a force, especially in Afghanistan. And the two major contributing, I would say 3 contributing factors now. One is the revolution in Iran, which had an impact on the Taliban movement. Another one is the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. And the third one is the outside support for the Taliban. At that time, it was the Mujahideen. That's one thing. I'm glad you mentioned, Melinda, at the beginning, that people are confusing these Mujahideen with the Taliban. They're 2 different groups. Mujahideen were the ones that were fighting against the Soviet Union. They were not Taliban.
I was hoping you would get to that.
Yeah.
But during this 10-year occupation, you had both Mujahideen in Afghanistan and then also as a part of the refugee communities in Iran and Pakistan? Or
no, these were Taliban were in its infancy at the time when the Mujahideen were fighting. Mujahideen were the power. They were the tribal leaders, these Mujahideen. They were former teachers and scholars and lawyers and others. So in the Mujahideen group, you had all kinds of people fighting against the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan.
Okay, so they were fighting against that.
In the Taliban movement, it is mostly these religious scholars who are dominating. This seminary graduates are dominating. You will not find scholars and professors and lawyers in the Taliban. So that's the big, huge difference between Mujahideen were an umbrella group which included all kinds of people, intellectuals, Western educated elite and others. So in the Mujahideen group, but in the Taliban group, it's mostly, and that's one reason why they call them a sort of extremist groups. And when you go to their implementations of the laws, Talibans are strictly going to establish a state in Afghanistan in which Sharia will be the dominant, the Islamic laws will be the law of the land, and the interpretation of Islam is, again, Islam is a religion and it has been interpreted differently by different groups. And Talibans are regarded by scholars as collectively as one of the extremist groups. So they classify both the Iranian Ayatollahs as an extremist groups, are the Hezbollah and the Shia branch of Islam. And when it comes to the Sunni branch, in the case of Afghanistan and Pakistan, they classify the Taliban as an extremist group. I mean, that's the label that's given to them by outsiders and by analysts.
What about in Afghanistan? I mean, was there a period when people just consider them sort of normal or not extremist? Is it still like that in some pockets of Afghanistan, or do pretty much everyone consider them extremist? Or
yes, now your question is not how did they develop? How did they become a force?
Yeah,
these refugees or the children who came to Pakistan when they were born, it was 1979. It's 80. So now each one of them are about 40 years old. Many of them who went to the madrasas and graduated. So they are a very large group in Pakistan. And by the way, we should not confuse, there are 2 groups of Taliban. One are the Afghan Taliban, who are the refugees, and others in Pakistan. They have their headquarters in Pakistan. And there are Pakistani Taliban. Pakistani Taliban are different from the Afghan Taliban. The
Okay.
Pakistani Taliban have they call it Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan. This is the Persian name. Means the movement of the Pakistani Taliban. They're separate from the Afghan Taliban.
Okay.
So the Pakistani Taliban, their movement is against the Pakistani government. They want to defeat the Pakistani government and establish an Islamic state in Pakistan. But the Afghan Taliban is the one that which want to go to Afghanistan and defeat the current government, and they wanted to do the Hamid Karzai's government, and now against this current government, they want this to defeat and establish. And Taliban were ruling Afghanistan. I will come to that. So this, as a political movement, started in 1994. I was in Pakistan year before that and after that. So this movement started and supported by the Pakistani ISI and the Pakistani military and the Pakistani intelligence against the Afghan puppet government which the Soviet Union left. The Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan from 1979 to 1989. The Soviet troops withdrew from Afghanistan after 10 years of occupation, but they left a government in Afghanistan which was a pro-Soviet government. That one survived 4 more years.
Mm-hmm.
So they left in 1989. And by the way, this is another part of the history. The Soviet Union left Afghanistan in 1989. 1 year later, the Soviet Union collapsed as the Soviet Union.
Right.
This I do not know. Probably the 10-year occupation in Afghanistan contributed to the collapse of the Soviet Union. Maybe not, but it was not the only thing. But that's really, even President Trump mentioned this one day in one of his interviews, that the Soviet Union went to Afghanistan, and after 10 years, the Soviet Union collapsed, and now it's Russia. So this Soviet Union collapsed 1 year after their troop withdrawal from Afghanistan, but they left a government behind. That government survived until 1992. In 1992, that government collapsed, and the Mujahideen went and captured Afghanistan in 1992. Taliban came and captured the government in Afghanistan in 1996. So the Mujahideen government in Afghanistan survived from 1992 to 1996.
Oh, okay.
In 1996, Taliban defeated the Mujahideen government and established the Taliban regime in 1996. They were in power until September 11, 2001. It was during the Taliban rule in Afghanistan when the September the 11th happened.
Of course.
September the 11th happened, and 3,000 Americans were killed in New York and Washington, D.C. The United States government warned the Taliban government at that time, in 2001, to surrender the Al-Qaeda people to the Americans or the United Nations, and Taliban did not do it. And that's one reason why the American and the coalition forces invaded Afghanistan in 2001. On October 7, 2001, American forces went to Afghanistan, and they defeated the Taliban government, and Taliban left Afghanistan in 2001. And Americans took with them Hamid Karzai to Afghanistan, and Hamid Karzai was supported by the American government. And until this moment, from 2001 to now, almost 2021. So the past 19 years, American forces have been in Afghanistan, and American forces are supporting the current Afghan government. And now the American government is negotiating with the same Taliban who was fighting with Americans for the past 20 years to negotiate with them a settlement.
Right.
And that's what Zalmay Khalilzad and others are all. So they're working with Taliban somehow, that Americans can withdraw its troops from Afghanistan after almost 20 years. And Americans want to leave only about 2,500 American troops in Afghanistan if the negotiations will succeed the way it's going on right now.
So what's the goal of the negotiation? Is it just to get the Taliban to stop attacking people? Or because we don't want them to be the government anymore.
There are two different views. American military has the way we look at from outside. The the American military from the beginning, they thought that Taliban should be defeated or weakened to the point that they will accept the conditions of the peace in Afghanistan. So when Trump came as a president, he suggested that I'm going to withdraw the Afghan American troops. It's not our business to go to other countries. And American military officers were against that, this kind of irresponsible, abruptly withdrawing the troops without getting anything in Afghanistan, because we saw that at the beginning. When the Soviet Union left Afghanistan after 10 years of occupation, Afghanistan became a vacuum to which Al-Qaeda and Taliban and Mujahideen and all these radical groups went to Afghanistan. So the American generals and the American political scientists and experts were saying that withdrawing from Afghanistan without getting any kind of solution, it's dangerous, because Afghanistan will again become a sort of place for the international terrorists.
So tell me about that vacuum left by the Soviets. I mean, when they pulled out, it was pretty abrupt, right? Like they
did very abruptly. And that's exactly what Americans did not want to repeat that. Because they went abruptly, left Afghanistan, and Afghanistan became a vacuum to Al-Qaeda, and then all these other groups were later formed, more dangerous than. So that's what Americans wanted to avoid. But somehow the Trump administration came and then scrambled everything, and so did not listening to the advisors and the people that were experts, whatever. That's what our view, some of us that were analyzing Afghanistan. We saw that this abrupt leaving without getting any kind of concessions from the Taliban or the Pakistani government. Again, we are focusing now on Taliban, but we should focus on Pakistan, because Pakistan is the place where the Taliban are surviving, training.
They just go there because that's across the border.
They have their headquarters, yes.
Yeah.
Their leaders are under control of the Pakistani ISI. So what happened in the past 19 years, somehow with Americans having all kinds of problems all over the world, did not focus much on Pakistan. And one of the main reasons that Pakistan was not pressured was that because Pakistan is a nuclear power now, and Americans have a difficulty dealing with Pakistan. The United States does not want to pressure Pakistan to the point that their government collapses and it's a nuclear power, and we do not want to do that. But if we leave them the way they function, Taliban are still using the Pakistani territory for training, and there are this Haqqani group and others. The Pakistani military knows they have not pressured the Taliban to the negotiation table. So Pakistan has not been pressured to I'm not talking about the influence, I should say. In diplomacy, you do not pressure a country. So the Americans did not use neither the Soviet Union nor Americans have used their political power to bring some sort of peace to Afghanistan. So the Soviet Union failed after 10 years. Mm-hmm. My assessment is that Americans are failing after 20 years in Afghanistan. The way it's going on.
Oh my gosh.
I do not see a bright future right now. The way things are going.
Yeah, I mean, it shouldn't have taken 20 years, whatever it is, we were trying to do there, or the government was trying to do there.
On October the 7th, 2021, will be full 20 years of American involvement in Afghanistan. They went on October the 7th, 2001. Yeah, and then it will be October the 7th, 2021 will be exactly 20 years for America.
Yeah. So I guess a big part of that then would be that the Taliban can just flee into Pakistan, regroup, regain strength, and come back. Is that one of the main problems?
They do get their training. Their headquarters are in Quetta, Pakistan, Balochistan, and their headquarters are in Peshawar Northwest, which used to be the northwest frontier of Pakistan. They're very active, and without the support of the Pakistan, right now, according to the Pakistani experts themselves, among the Taliban that were fighting in Afghanistan, there are probably about 30,000 of them are Pakistani Taliban and others and Pakistani volunteers. So without the Pakistan's support, Taliban will have difficulty to survive. And the same is true for the Afghan government. Without the American support, the United States is supporting the current Afghan government, tons of monies. Americans have spent more money in Afghanistan than Americans spent in the Marshall Plan, redeveloping Europe and other places. So the United States is spent billions of dollars. And another thing, let's go to the human life. Americans have lost close to 3,000 men and women in Afghanistan in the past 19 years. 3,000 American men and women, not counting the contractors and others. And billions of dollars were spent. And now Americans are going to withdraw. What they're getting in Afghanistan, no one knows.
Mm-hmm. It's very unfortunate. Yeah. So that's one main problem, is that they can regroup in Pakistan. Pakistan is on the border with the Pashtun area of Afghanistan. Is there kind of like more strength within the Pashtun communities for, Taliban support, or is it just,
It's a very good question. I'm glad that you brought this one.
Not ethical.
When you look at Afghanistan is a landlocked country.
Mm-hmm.
It has boundary with China, which is an East Asian country. Then Afghanistan has common boundaries with Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and Turkmenistan, which are the former Central Asia. And now they're independent countries. Then Afghanistan has about over 550 miles boundary with Iran, which is a Middle Eastern country. Then Afghanistan has a 1,400 miles boundary with Pakistan, which is a South Asian region.
Right.
So in other words, Afghanistan is connecting East Asia to Central Asia to the Middle East and to South Asia. It's a very important strategic area. And again, coming to the ethnic groups, there are Pashtuns, almost equal number of Pashtuns in Afghanistan and equal number of Pashtuns in the northwest frontier and other areas of Pakistan. Baloch is another ethnic group which Afghanistan shares. Because there are Balochs in three countries, in Iran and Pakistan and Afghanistan. 1/3 of the Balochs are in Pakistan, and 1/3 probably a little bit more than 1/3 in Pakistan. So these are ethnic groups which Afghanistan shares with Pakistan. And this is one reason why Pakistan is that important, for either bringing peace to Afghanistan or bringing chaos to Afghanistan. Pakistan is a major country. And another major country which is very much involved in Afghanistan, is directly or indirectly, is Iran.
Yeah.
Iran is a Shia majority country. It's about a country of about 80 million people. Afghanistan is estimated around 30 million people. And about 15% of Afghans are the Shiites. And they're from the same Shia branch as the Iranians are. They call it the 12er Shiites. Mm-hmm. So they have influence with each other. They're co-religionist, co-sectarian groups. And the same is true with the Pakistan. So this is one reason why Pakistan is so effective, so strong in Afghanistan, because of these common ethnic groups. And at the same time, the headquarters of many of these Pakistani move. And the Taliban I was in Pakistan at the time, in the 1994, when the Taliban were making attacks on the Mujahideen government at the time. They defeated the Mujahideens and then they captured. That was without the help of Pakistan, this would not have happened. And I think everyone knows in the military and intelligence of the United States that Pakistan is the country which can bring the peace to Afghanistan. I mean, not bring the peace, help bring the peace more than any other country in the region or in the world. If Pakistan is not cooperating with bringing peace, but Pakistan wants to bring peace in Afghanistan in their own conditions, which is important for their national security against India too. That's another factor.
Yeah. What's
Pakistan and India or any others? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So Pakistan is using Afghanistan as a reservoir, as a strategic importance, as a strategic depth for the Pakistanis. So Afghanistan have become it used to be an arena for the superpower competition. Now Afghanistan has become an arena for the regional powers. Iran is jockeying to have influence in Afghanistan. Pakistan wants in Afghanistan a government which is pro-Pakistani. India wants a government in Afghanistan which is pro-India, or at least not neutral as far as Pakistan and India is concerned. And China wants a government in Afghanistan which is independent, so China can use its natural resources.
Yeah.
China has already received the copper in Afghanistan. There is lithium in Afghanistan. There are other minerals which are very important for China and for the United States and Russia too. Russia is watching Afghanistan too. It's a country which has tremendous amount of natural resources, including lithium, copper, iron. There's some, and not counting the precious minerals of Afghanistan, which are from rubies to lapis lazulis and emerald and others and others. So Afghanistan has natural resources, which because of the wars and others, those were not exploited the way they were supposed to be exploited.
Yeah, there's so many landmines still on the ground.
Yeah,
even
just a factor
from the 70s.
When I go to Afghanistan each year, I see people are brought on backs of the donkeys or carts, or their foot blown up because those hundreds and thousands of mines the Soviets have put in the places for their own security, they're still there. Afghanistan is one of the most mined country in the world.
Yeah,
one or two in the whole world. So the Soviets have planted the bombs, did not remove it, and Afghans did it, and American supported groups in Afghanistan, they did it. Pakistan, and mine clearing is nobody pays attention to that in these days.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's just so much to cover, that the mine problem becomes, sadly, it's not considered newsworthy, I guess, anymore. But that's a huge problem there. I mean, imagine trying to create a farm, or I don't know, create a settlement with all those explosives just lying everywhere. It's impossible. So it's very hard to rebuild.
Afghans are drawing some conclusions from Soviet invasion of Afghanistan and American involvement in Afghanistan. Even though Americans do not like to be called American invasion, they do not call it invasion, they call it supporting Afghanistan. The Soviet Union was invading, we are not in, but the same. When the foreign forces are in a country, that country which has foreign forces and supports the government, they are dominating the politics and economics of that country. So that's one thing that Afghans have learned, that foreign invasions mostly do not fix things. They destroy things very easily when the rebuilding becomes the extremely important problem. What the Soviets have left behind, the roads were bombarded, the schools were bombarded, and they never built anything. There's very little that one can say that in the 10 years occupation, Soviets have built this hospital, Soviets have built this bridge, Soviets have built this factory, nothing. In this 20 years of American involvement in Afghanistan, very little. Yeah, the government was established in Afghanistan, is recognized. There are some things. But there is very little that Afghans can really boast about that. Well, the foreign invasions have done some good things. Kabul universities, functioning universities, girls are going back to school. There are progress made in many areas. But as far as the system of the government, we should rail this country into the constitution of the rights of the women, for example.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And I mean, there's a lot we could talk about in terms of like why things don't get built, like hospitals or power plants. My dad was in Afghanistan working on the power grid, or the power generation there. But I think it just has to do with, I guess, armies aren't really made for building, they're made for destroying, and it's mainly been a military presence. I mean, there's also a diplomatic presence, I suppose, as well, but it seems primarily military. So I don't know. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it is true that sometimes this militarization of the civilian projects, so any outside military which supports a hospital, that becomes a target for the enemy. That, well, this is an institution that Americans want to build. It's not a university. It's the American sort of training pro-American group, that sort of thing. It becomes very easy. So that's one thing that why when this foreign governments go to another country and by their military they want to establish something to begin with, that's target for the opposition. But if it is through civilian villages and at the grassroots level, it does not create that kind of resentment. But it's something, okay, fancy university is built by the Russians, Institute of Technology or whatever. From the beginning, that was a target for the anti-communist groups in Afghanistan. And when Americans built something to make impression that, well, this is an American school or American such and such and such, and built by the military. So that's one reason why your father was one of those. They wanted to civilize what are the help which goes through the electric grid, which everyone can use it. Roads, for example, clinics, hospitals, vaccinations of the children and that sorts of thing. So those are not an easy target. But if it's military behind that, you do that by the uniformed people, it becomes a clear thing that the invading armies are building these things. They're not something original which is coming from the people themselves.
Right.
Afghanistan is a poor country. It does not have, we're talking about 10 years of the Soviet occupation, 10 years of the civil war in Afghanistan, and now 10 years of American occupation. We're talking about 40 years. 40 years of war in a poor country. We're talking about one generation. So one generation of Afghans have been just born and raised and got old and died in wars, in fightings. Again, coming to the point, the Taliban as they never had power through this history of Islam in the past 1400 or 1400 and some years from the beginning of Islam. There were but they became a force because they're using guns and this new technologies and tanks and blowing up the mine, that sort of thing. So that's one reason. So they're boasting that God is on their side, and at the same time they're using very little weapons, which is made by outsiders. So it's a.
Do you think they were inspired by the Mujahideen, or were they mainly rivals with them? I mean, what's their relationship with the Mujahideen?
Some of them are the former Mujahideen. When they became a power, what happened? As a matter of fact, as I mentioned that, when the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, there was only one channel for Americans to support the resistance against the Soviet Union. It was during the Reagan administration, especially. When you look at the Reagan administration, when you go, just go any magazine and any record, President Reagan would invite these Afghan Mujahideen with their beards and turbans to the White House quite often. And Reagan called them freedom fighters against the Soviet Union. They are the people that were fighting. Brzezinski will go to the boundaries, even during the Carter administration, the Reagan administration. They all supported the Afghan resistance against the Soviet Union. But what happened? They did not support the intellectuals and educated people and the nationalists and others. They just put their eggs in one basket with this.
Oh, wow.
So to speak, today they term them as radicals or extremists. So the Americans supported the extremists in Afghanistan. This is a fact. We should not ignore it. So the American government during the Reagan administration, during the Bush administration and others, they all supported these radical groups, which were Mujahideen and later the Taliban. So finally, they turn against the interests of the ones that supported them. So what happened? Unfortunately, in international, this kind of situations as Afghanistan, when a country is invaded and the invaders leave, so the country is left in rubble. That everything is destroyed: schools, universities, roads, power plants. And that's why your father was there to help rebuild the power grid in Afghanistan. So there were many of those that were in the civilian areas because they want to rebuild Afghanistan. So this rebuilding has become so politicized today that it's happening only in those areas which the commanders want them to do. So, and Americans had at one point 100 American troops in Afghanistan, 100 American troops, and 50,000 NATO troops were in Afghanistan. So 150,000 American and coalition forces were in Afghanistan. Now there are only about 4,000 left. So the Americans supported the extremists in Afghanistan. This is a fact. We should not ignore it. So the Americans did not have, as a matter of fact, when the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, they The very easy argument is, if 150,000 foreign troops did not defeat the Taliban, what can this 2,500 Americans, which will be left in Afghanistan, they will do against the Taliban? So what would they do? So they cannot fight against the Taliban. So what they do? They want to negotiate with Taliban. So that's the very simple argument now. 150,000 American and coalition forces did not defeat the Taliban. Taliban are still saying that we are not defeated, we are winning. Now, what
about Iran and Pakistan in this? I mean, like, why aren't we negotiating with them too? You know, like, it seems kind of like pointless. I don't know. Maybe
American negotiators with Iran, there is no negotiation. Whatever American builds in Afghanistan, Iran is going to destroy it. So Iranians are sabotaging what Americans are doing in Afghanistan. And that's the same is true. What Iran is doing, Americans are sabotaging it. So that's what Americans and Iranians are each other's foes now. So they're countering each other's successes in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
In the case of Pakistan, which is still a country which is closely linked in international security with the Sinto Pact and that the past of Pakistan. So Pakistan still is a country that American military has some influence in Pakistan.
Yeah.
But the experts are saying that Americans have not used their influence effectively in Pakistan to convince the Pakistani military and intelligence and others to take positive steps in Afghanistan. And one of the reasons that they are giving is that since Pakistan is a nuclear power, has tons of nuclear bombs, and Americans cannot pressure them to the point that they can collapse. So the United States is walking very tightrope to pressure Pakistan to what degree so that they cannot collapse and keep the nuclear bombs safe, because they're afraid if Pakistan was shattered like Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia did not have nuclear bombs. Pakistan has nuclear bombs. If something like Yugoslavia happens in Pakistan, the dangers, it's really, people cannot even think that what will be the consequences of shattering Pakistan into Punjab. Punjab will go into one direction, Sindh will be going in a different direction, Balochistan will be going in a different direction, and the Pashtuns will be going, because Pakistan is not a very strong country either. It's a fragile, when you look at the ethnicity, the sectarian groups. So that's what American policymakers know, that Pakistan is a fragile country. So we should not pressure them as much as we want to. So they're dealing with Pakistan in a very delicate dancing. So at the same time, they want to have positive steps in Afghanistan, but at the same time, not to the level. So this is one reason. Anyone, if tomorrow Biden comes, he will have the same problem with Pakistan. I don't think that will be solved. Dealing with Pakistan has become one of the most important priority, I think, in the region. North Korea is one.
Sounds like
too much about North Korea. Unfortunately, they're not talking too much about Pakistan.
Right. Yeah, I was just thinking that. I mean, when I think of nuclear powers or potential, nuclear issues, I think about North Korea because that's what's in the news. But not much is mentioned about Pakistan in terms of its nuclear capabilities in the news.
Yeah, this is again one of the miscalculations, that they think that Pakistan will remain like this for 50 more years, but that's a wishful thinking.
Yeah.
Pakistan is a fragile country and with the nuclear powers. It's just like, imagine Yugoslavia possessing 10, 15, 20 nuclear bombs, each one of them, some people say that many, more powerful than the bombs were used in Nagasaki and Hiroshima in World War II. So Pakistan is the only Muslim majority country in the world which possesses nuclear bombs. And that's where the danger lies.
Okay. That's quite a lesson, I think, from our conversation. Anything else that we should cover in terms of like what people should know that's not in the news, like with regard to the Taliban and who they are and their role?
It was one thing, because I get a lot of emails from my colleagues and my friends that collectively, scholars in the universities, people know who are Taliban, who are Pakistani Taliban, what does Taliban mean, their movement, where do they get their support from? So they wanted to shed some light on that. Coming to the financial support of the Taliban. So the most important source for the Taliban support is the Pakistani government right now, number one in the world. Number two is the Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain, the people who are channeling their religious charities. They call it zakat, which is the fifth column of the Muslims. And that's what each Muslim is supposed to give 2.5% among the Sunnis and about almost 5% among some Shia branches to the charity and needy. They're channeling those money to these not knowing. Many of them are just devout Muslims. They think that Taliban are fighting for the right. They're fighting against Americans and Americans are supporting Israel. And that sort of propaganda plays an important role. And then they're channeling, and it's very difficult to close those channels of this money going to them. The second, Taliban are now in control of almost about half of Afghanistan, about 40-some percent. They're controlling the areas which are under the narcotics, the opiums are grown. They take Ushr. Ushr in Arabic means tenth. So that's what they're collecting their money. In another area, they're controlling. When your father was in Afghanistan, he knew that. For electricity, you need diesel and petroleum and others for the generators. Where are they coming from? They're coming from through Pakistan, because Iran is a country that Americans do not allow Iran to be used. Through Pakistan. And it comes through Pakistan, and Pakistan, all those roads are controlled by Pakistani Taliban and Afghan Taliban. They're taking the money from each one of the trucks that they're allowing. So they're generating money. This is illegal, illicit money, either through the opium and drug trafficking, or through controlling the areas. Americans would need gasoline for their military garrisons in Marjan, in Arghandab. And Taliban are taking money from, if they're allowing some of the trucks to go and pass. So they're in control. So the money that they're generating. And then there are, again, those countries which are against the United States. The American intelligence have discovered that even the Russians are supporting the Taliban indirectly against Americans, because the Russians want to take the revenge from Americans, what they did to the Russians, to the Soviet Union in the 10 years of occupation. So some Iranians are supporting indirectly the Taliban too, not because they like Taliban. Taliban are fighting against Americans. So that's what my enemy's enemy is my friend. This is a crude example that they give, but still that's in practice it works. Iran is indirectly supporting the Taliban. That were discovered by the American intelligence, explosives that Iran has, and Russia is indirectly supporting the Taliban, either directly or indirectly. China is not happy with Americans succeeding in Afghanistan. So the United States policies have many enemies in the region. The clear ones are China does not want Americans to succeed in Afghanistan. Iran does not want Americans to succeed in Afghanistan. Russia does not want Americans to succeed in Afghanistan.
Which kind of goes back to my question of why aren't we talking to all the surrounding countries? It seems sort of like a futile mission if we're, whatever America is doing is being countered by all the other countries in the region, even if the Afghans want it. Or
that's the Afghans are asking the same question, Melinda, as you're asking. That if it's that complicated, Russia does not want what Americans do in Afghanistan. Iran does not want Americans to succeed. China does not want. And Taliban do not want Americans to succeed. So who are not supporting the American? So that's one reason that people are inside Afghanistan is asking that the Afghanistan question has become more than the problem of America or China. There has to be some sort of international consensus.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what Afghans are longing for. I listened to this. They said that the Afghan problem has become so complicated that if Americans do something, others do not like. If China does, others do not like. If Russia wants to do something for Afghanistan, the Mujahideen who fought against them for 10 years, they're not. If Pakistan does, Afghans hate the Pakistani influence in Afghanistan either. If India does, so let's
India seems like a major.
Let's have a different formula now.
There, yeah.
There has to be some sort of either United Nations effort that all of these countries should come together to consensus and say that, well, look, let's do something for the poor Afghans.
It does make me think of Wilson, like what he was saying we should do, but it didn't quite. Woodrow Wilson, whose ideas pretty much started the United Nations.
The League of Nations.
He started the League of Nations, which became the United Nations.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, you're right.
I mean, his idea was to have this sort of, like international consensus to solve the world's problems without war, right? So, but it didn't seem to turn out that way with the UN. Like the UN is somehow like kind of impotent, I guess, or
it's a funny part of the history. The whole League of Nations was the brainchild of a great thinker like Woodrow Wilson. He came with the League of Nations in the International Court of Justice in Hague, so that people can take their disputes first before going to the war. It was a very nice ideal. But when it came to the United States Congress, they did not approve it. They did not ratify. So the Americans were left outside. So it tells you that sometimes things become so complicated that a visionary president who wanted something the Congress did not ratify. So that's what we have to wait about another war to come. And then Eisenhower, again, a Republican president, became successful launching the United Nations. It was a discharge that which happened. So another Republican president came up and he said...
And he was also very opinionated, had strong ideas about national sovereignty.
Yes.
He didn't want to support the like when the Suez Canal was
nationalized.
It was basically the grips on the Suez Canal were getting loosened. Wasn't it Nasser who was getting some Russian support? I was actually just watching this on the Crown. So
it was before that. It was 1954 that led to the first British, French, and Israeli attack on Egypt at the time when the Suez Canal was nationalized in 1954. Nasser came, the coup took place in Egypt in 1952. Nasser became undisputed leader so he nationalized. Yeah. And what happened? And again, it was Eisenhower that who finally pressured both France and United Kingdom at the time, because he did not want. Eisenhower was a military officer, and he knew he was the commander of the theater in Europe. He did not want to go to another war because Americans were just out of World War I, World War II. The Korean War just ended at that time, and they did not want to create another war. So that was one of the reasons so Nasser succeeded. Nasser used the time effectively. That's why he succeeded by nationalizing the Suez Canal at that time. So it happened. Yeah, you are absolutely right. So but at least he launched an institution which survived until this date. So the United Nations, it is not very effective the way we want or anyone else, but it is still prevented many and done extremely good things. Not only one branch of the United Nations, we're talking about the ILO, which is the labor organization, WHO.
Yeah. Food and there's also the food and agriculture.
Yeah, UNESCO and others are very successful institutions. I think the world can be proud of some of those. They're not very effective. They could be better.
I had an internship at the UN in Bangkok, and I mean, it's it feels similar to a university in a way. Like it's definitely, there's that bureaucratic element to it, It has lots of good programs, but the right hand doesn't always know what the left hand's doing. And, but I do tune into the UN meetings every now and then to see what they're talking about. They're usually talking about really critical global issues. And like they have the sustainability goals that I think are really good. So they do provide like a framework, that could potentially be followed. It's just how do you get countries on board, and
unfortunately, eventually some of them become very politicized. So when you mix politics with religion, our religion with politics. Welfare of the people and the poor and needy and disease, and just look at this, the COVID-19. I don't think without the international effort we will ever succeed. One country cannot do that. Two countries together cannot do that.
So true.
You cannot prevent the disease. You cannot isolate yourself in a bubble forever. So again, those institutions are needed. Could be better.
Could be better, but yeah, it's important to have a kind of not nonpartisan, but some entity that's not linked with a specific country, I guess, that can collate all the different perspectives and different input. So that we have some kind of concept or strategy for moving forward. But I guess it's up to countries to cooperate and, local communities as well. So, well, I think our time is almost up, but if you have anything else, we can take a little bit longer. I don't have anything else.
What I wanted that how the term Taliban came into being, and who were the Taliban at the beginning? Students of the religious institutions, Islamic religious institutions, madrasas. Today, they do not call a student who goes to the elementary school or public school in Afghanistan or in Iran or Turkey, they do not call them Talib. They call them students. But the ones who go to the religious institutions, they're using the term Talib only specifically for those groups who go to seminaries, Islamic seminaries.
Mm-hmm.
In the case of Turkey, Imam Khatib or Imam Hatib institutions, which they call them by the name. So those are training mullahs and clergy, that sorts of thing. And then again,
I saw some of those in Turkey. Yeah,
it's only two groups of Taliban. One is Pakistani Taliban. They are separate from the Afghan Taliban. They do not take their command from the same person. They have different leadership and different targets. And again, not to be confused with the Mujahideen.
And they're political, and they're more political.
The Pakistani Taliban, their focus is to gain election and succeed inside Pakistan more than Afghanistan. But the Afghani Taliban are somehow, since they do not have their own headquarters in Afghanistan, so they have their headquarters in Pakistan. And they have their training camps there. They get their charities there. So their leaders are there. If you remember that Osama bin Laden was killed in Pakistan, and his second in command, Osama bin Laden's Al-Qaeda, this Ayman al-Zawahiri, is in Pakistan right now, in the Pakistani border areas. So, and not only now, we're talking about this other ISIS. We have not discussed that yet. We focused on Taliban and Al-Qaeda. But there is another radical group, which is worse than all of them combined.
Oh, yeah.
It is this Daesh, or this ISIS, or Islamic State of Iraq and Levant, ISIL. So this is more brutal, more dangerous. And they have their...
Right. I have that impression.
They have their followers in Afghanistan.
They're really brutal, yeah. And whereas the Taliban, it seems like the Taliban sometimes are like community members, and that's sort of, they have a family there. They're, fairly normal people, I guess, in Afghanistan. Whereas it seems like with Daesh, it's more like they're really militant, like more like gangs,
This is one reason why Daesh is not succeeding much in Afghanistan and Pakistani areas, because they're foreigners. They're Arabs. Yeah. Majority of them are Arabs, either Syrians or Iraqis or Saudi Arabians, just like we saw this September 11. The September 11, those 19 terrorists, 15 of them were from Saudi Arabia. So among this Daesh group, there are Saudi Arabians, United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Kuwait, Sudanese, all kinds of people. They do not have roots in Pakistan. They do not know the culture of Pakistan or Afghanistan. So what they do most of these dangerous things through somehow they subcontract that to the Taliban, Pakistani Taliban or Afghan Taliban. Since they do not have their own Arab roots in the village, they cannot even speak to the people in Urdu, in Pakistani.
Wow, yeah.
They cannot speak to the Afghans in Pashto and Farsi. And so what they do, they're good fighters. But when it comes to the commanding, and the commander is an Afghan Taliban at Pakistani Taliban. So that's one reason that this Daesh, they're more successful in the Arab countries when they have common language. Yeah. They're successful in other countries which the languages are different than the Arabic. So they have to do most of the dangerous things, terroristic acts, whatever, is through the ones that who are in the first line, people like local Afghan Taliban or Pakistani Taliban. So for that reason, I always argue that Daesh can make more headways in Arabic-speaking countries.
Right. Very good point. Yeah. Okay, good. Well, so if any of you are interested in more of these conversations, we will be having another podcast in 3 weeks. And just, follow us on our Facebook page, or you can also follow us. We have a YouTube channel, and we have, you can follow us on Spreaker. And there's a website. Actually, I can maybe put the website. Put that in the comments. And Dr. Payan also teaches a course this coming spring. It's 5645 is the course number, and it's in International Studies and in Near Eastern Languages and Culture. So you can take it through either department. And in that class, you can really take a deep dive, have these kind of conversations, but also with, learning like the history, how to break down the meaning of all these current events. So I highly recommend that class. That was one of the best classes I took when I was a graduate student at Ohio State, and helped me, kind of figure out what I was most curious about and wanted to study in the Middle East. So it's definitely broader than Afghanistan. It's the whole Middle East that you'll cover. And what other resources do you want to share, Dr. Payan, with people who are tuning in?
I think probably the first of all, which is easy to read, is the Keys to Understanding the Middle East that you and I prepared. It's an ebook. And there are some other books which, if they want to know about Afghanistan, it's written by an archaeologist by the name of Louis Dupree. It's Afghanistan. It's very encyclopedic. It gives almost 40,000 years of the bones which were found in Afghanistan from that period on. It's all the Bactrian civilization of the time. And so that would be something that if they want to know about Afghanistan, then Afghanistan came under the control of the Persian Empire, of the Achaemenians. So he covers all those. So those are the two books if they want to know something about Afghanistan and the region. And about the Middle East, it's Arthur Goldschmidt's book, which A Concise History of the Middle East, which is a very encyclopedic. It covers country by country. If anyone these are for the beginners, and the others there are all kinds of new books are written about Afghanistan. They can do the Google search and they will find new topics.
Yeah, those are all great resources. I highly recommend those. Definitely worth the read. I would say everyone should definitely read the Goldschmidt book. It's easy. It's not easy to read. It's just it is written well and it flows and it's very interesting. It really explains a lot of the history of the whole Middle East. And then I've also shared our ebook, a link to our ebook if you're interested in that. And that's very easy as well. It's entirely open online, and it's basically actually a website, but it's got a table of contents and you can flip through it like a book. So there's visual aids and lots of things. So yeah, I think that's it for today. I hope that we'll get some more people. We had 3 people join us today live. So I'm getting the hang of, how all this works, but I think if we keep doing it, we'll get more, and I'll definitely be sharing the recording so people can have a chance to get the information at another time too. So, and I'll be inviting other Ohio State professors who focus on the Middle East. So we'll be having a lot of different voices on these podcasts. And I'll probably also be posting on our YouTube channel a video about minority rights in Turkey that came out of a webinar that we did a little while back. So I'm also going to put our website here. Should be on the Facebook page as well, but just, you can find a lot of resources there as well. So
we should do something about also the ethnic groups, because Afghanistan is a mosaic.
Yeah.
Because sharing boundaries with Iran and Turkmenistan and Tajikistan and Uzbekistan and China and Pakistan. So it has all these. You have Uzbeks in Afghanistan, you have Tajiks in Afghanistan, you have Turkmens in Afghanistan, you have Baloch in Afghanistan, you have Kyrgyz in Afghanistan, you have all sorts of Shia, Sunni, this and that. So that's the ethnography of that region. And then what Afghanistan shares with Iran, what Afghanistan shares with Uzbekistan, Tajik. So that's another topic that will be of interest to the people. That if we can
definitely.
Yeah,
I would be really interested in that. Especially after today's discussion. So let's put that in our list of topics that we'll cover in the podcast. Okay, good. Well, thanks so much, Dr. Pan. I really appreciate you taking.
Thank you, Melinda, for organizing it and then for being a moderator. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and thanks to our international affairs colleagues as well, because they shared this out for us. And we're actually a part of the Office of International Affairs at Ohio State, a really wonderful group of people. And it's the office that supports education abroad, virtual exchange, and all of our wonderful international faculty and students at Ohio State that enrich our cultural diversity there. So thanks, everyone. Have a great day. I'm going to sign off.
Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.